Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of the Behold podcast on the Genre Equality channel. I'm Hitzer.
Hi, Maisa.
This week, we're going to delve into not four or five topics, but we're going to deep dive through all the nitty gritty, break down what I consider to be one of the best prestige dramas ever made.
Yeah,
It came out back in 2007 during the height of the prestige drama, peak TV, golden age of TV era, whatever you want to call it, right?
yeah.
It was compared alongside the likes of, your The Sopranos, your Breaking Bads, those type of shows.
Mhm.
And in my opinion, one of the best of that era, if not the best of that era,
Yeah.
was AMC's Mad Men,
Mhm.
which really catapulted the network AMC, which at that point in time didn't have Breaking Bad and didn't have The Walking Dead yet. Um, Mad Men was his first real shot at proving that it could do original programming. Obviously, The Walking Dead and Breaking Bad lifted it to another stratosphere, made it a very important cable channel. But Mad Men was the pinnacle of that,
Mhm.
obviously alongside Breaking Bad. Lah.
Yeah.
And during that particular era with, The Wire was out on HBO, Breaking Bad was competing with its sister show Mad Men on the same network. Those to me, those three shows, Mad Men, Breaking Bad,
Mm.
and The Wire were, in my opinion, the holy trinity
Yeah.
of prestige dramas, or what we've come to know as prestige dramas. It wasn't known as prestige dramas then. Like, it was just like a really high quality drama we've never seen before, in the vein of The Sopranos. But now we call it prestige dramas. Um, what was your experience with Mad Men when it was still airing?
Ooh. I do remember. I think I jumped on board Mad Men maybe midway through season one, right when it first
Mm,
came
mm.
out. Well, I can't remember what year that was exactly. Um, but yeah, people were talking about like the look and the feel of it and the suits, and I think like the way season one was kind of structured and kind of written was meant to draw kind of viewers in, right? Like
Yep,
they
yep.
just gave you just enough mystery about the whole thing. You have John Hamm as this like handsome animatic kind of ad man in this incredibly kind of glamorous uh
Mm,
fairy tale of the advertising industry back in the 60s,
yep.
and that definitely kind of drew me in. I think also at the time I personally was toying with the idea of entering that industry. um yeah,
Interesting. Okay.
yeah, so I checked it out, right? And I think it wasn't till maybe midway through season two or maybe beginning of season three that I kind of like, oh, okay, yeah. I felt like I kind of had a hold on where this was going
Yep.
necessarily, and then it kind of dropped off my radar. So it's only been in like, oh man, I don't know when did you give this assignment? Probably
Beginning of the year,
beginning of the year.
and
Yeah.
last year or beginning of the year. Yeah.
So
Close to end of the last year, lah, I think.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So like December-ish, I think you were saying, okay, let's do Mad Men. I was like, sure,
Mm.
right? Like I never kind of like gave it the kind of full shot. So I've sunk in the requisite hours to finish up all seven seasons
Yes.
of it.
Um,
Yeah.
Mad Men, I think, to me was a bit of a red-headed stepchild of prestige drama elites. In
Yes.
in my opinion, I
Mhm.
feel. Um, a lot of people say that The Wire and Breaking Bad, and I would actually classify Better Call Saul as part of Breaking Bad because it is.
Yes.
I know I'm cheating lah, but like I'm considering both shows as one of the elites. So I always felt like those shows were a little bit easier to get into because of the crime drama element, which is
Mhm.
very typical for American TV shows, right?
Yeah.
If you look at some of the most popular TV shows in the world, they are all gangster slash crime dramas. It's a very easy to hook. It's a very easy hook, lah.
Yeah.
Your Ozarks or your Peaky Blinders, which are lesser versions of already famous crime dramas, still succeed because they are stylish crime dramas.
Yeah.
Mad Men, on the other hand, was a workplace drama slash comedy, um, set in the 60s, in an era that most of us, the millennials I'm talking about, went
Mm.
around in or looked down upon. And it featured an industry that most of us unfamiliar with or would think of as, like dry or boring to watch. There isn't any, when you think about exciting television, you don't think about advertising execs sitting around a conference room delivering pitches, right?
Yeah.
It's just a very tough sell. And I think that's why I felt like Mad Men sort of fell under the radar. Lah. Not to say that it isn't culturally or critically appreciated. It obviously certainly is. But I find it rare to find people amongst my circle like, actually like, discerning people who watch The Wire and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like most of them don't watch Mad Men. Do you find that to be true also?
Oh, I think it's kind of very fair. I do know. Let's see. I knew Hardy watched Mad Men kind of religiously, right, when he was around. Uh,
Sure, yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
I kind of remember, but like in the greater circle of friends, very few. And interestingly enough, a lot of my friends who are in the ad industry never quite gave Mad Men the chance. I think it hit a bit
Mm-hmm.
too close to home, despite it kind
Mm.
of being a period piece for them to enjoy it for what it was. So
Mm.
yeah, I do think that general pattern is something that I observed as well.
Yeah. So if you're like a regular listener of Behold, this is not going to be a typical episode where we delve into different topics. Like we're going to be delving to one topic and breaking it down in many, many, many parts. This is obviously, I think, most similar to our Dune episode of Behold,
Yeah.
where we're essentially just talking about one large story and breaking down the many parts of it. So, what are we going to be talking about on Behold? So, obviously, we're going to be talking about one of the greatest prestige dramas ever created by Matthew Weiner. We're going to deep dive into the uniformly phenomenal performances in its ensemble.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about its best episodes. We're going to talk about its psychological study of shaping identity,
Hmm.
alongside its many dense themes about the dawn of American consumerism
Yeah.
and how advertising co-ops shifting cultural norms. If you're unfamiliar with Mad Men, let me give you a little breakdown. Mad Men begins in the fictional Sterling Cooper advertising agency on Madison Avenue in Manhattan, in New York. And later on, it shifts to Sterling Cooper Draper Price,
Yes.
located at the Time Life building in 6th Avenue. So, according to the pilot episode, the phrase madman was a slang term coined in the 1950s by advertisers working on Madison Avenue
Hmm.
to refer to themselves as Mad, being short for Madison. And, it just became a common slang for advertising execs in Madison Avenue around that period. The series' main character is, as you mentioned, in this enigmatic, charismatic advertising exec called Don Draper, played by John Hamm, who is initially the talented creative director at Sterling Cooper. He
Hmm.
is erratic and mysterious, but is widely regarded throughout the advertising world as a kind of a genius.
Yeah.
Some of the most iconic advertising campaigns in history are shown to be his creation in this, alternate universe here.
Hmm.
Later on, Don becomes a founding partner at Sterling Cooper Draper Price, but begins a struggle as his, highly calculated identity. It is revealed fairly early on that his identity is false.
Yeah.
And his calculated identity, this thing that he shaped for years and years and years, falls into a period of decline. The plot of the show essentially tracks the people in his personal and professional lives, colleagues, family, and friends, etc. And as the series progresses, it depicts the changing moods and social mores of the United States throughout the 1960s, all the way into the Cultural Revolution, or should I say the counter-cultural revolution in the late 60s and the early 70s. It has The show has achieved widespread critical acclaim for its writing, its acting, its directing, its lush visual style, its historical authenticity. It's won so many awards, particularly with John Hamm, who year in and year out competed with Bryan Cranston every year. It was either
Yeah.
him or Bryan Cranston for an Emmy or Golden Globe. It was just these two guys is dominating for 7 seasons. And you could easily see why.
Yeah.
I myself was never sure who was the better actor when I was watching both shows live, back to back. It's like
Hmm.
I will watch Breaking Bad and be like, damn, Walter White is the best character. And I will watch Mad Men, it's like, damn, like the nuance of Don Draper is unparalleled, that type of thing.
Yeah.
It is one of the most important shows of the 21st century of the golden age of television. And before we break it down into its various pieces and all the stuff that makes it great, what are your thoughts on Mad Men overall now that you've seen 7 seasons over the past few months?
Oh man. I think especially now that I have kind of like the fuller picture, right? Like a lot of the the characters that I kind of like initially kind of dismissed as kind of caricatures of themselves, like really you have to give them time, right? A lot of them don't come out kind of come online fully kind of flesh characters with their own kind of motivations and things that you don't see outside of their orbit around Draper
Mm.
and who he is as a person until much later on. I think that you know both Christina Hendricks and oh no, what's her name who plays Peggy? It just slipped my mind.
Elizabeth
Yeah,
Moss.
Elizabeth. I mean, I can't believe I forgot that. Yeah, Elizabeth like fully deserves the nominations that they've gotten both as lead
Mm.
actress and outstanding supporting actress. Because they turn out to be at times more compelling characters than Draper himself, right? As this kind
Mm.
of like as he kind of devolve not devolves like as he kind of unravels into his own boogeyman as the seasons go by. There's
Mm-hmm.
something they grow from strength to strength, and as their position kind of rises or their star kind of rises within the industry itself, like that makes a fascinating kind of counterpoint to Draper's um eventual fall, and that whole kind of like season 6 season 7 climb back to the top again, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So much of that is amazing in its own right, and it's hard not to draw comparisons to Breaking Bad, but it does feel like the ensemble cast in Mad Men does feature more widely and better uh than
Yeah, it's more similar to The Sopranos,
yeah,
actually.
yeah, exactly, right? Like it has a more even kind of distribution of screen time amongst all the cast that are there, whether or not they are kind of like permanent cast members or like long featuring ones
Mm-hmm.
as well. Which I kind of love, right? Because by the time I'm extremely invested in a
Yep.
wide number of people, and maybe a bit more so than necessarily what we got in Breaking Bad. Um,
Yes. Yeah, agree.
Yeah. So, like, having seen it in its entirety, I do feel it is definitely like it stands with the big three, right? Of prestige, of TV of the time, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I find it incredibly hard to rank
Yeah.
any of the three individually because they're kind of all their own different monsters. But I do feel there were moments in time where the seasons felt uneven. And a lot of that
Mm.
had to do, I think, perhaps with my perception of what Dawn's journey could have been instead of what
Mm.
is actually shown. Like a lot of it had to do with managing kind of my own expectations about, okay, he's getting better here. Oh no, he's going back there. And like that mirrored itself in how I felt about the writing overall. Like every time Don goes back to like, his old ways or he slips into, some bad habits that you thought that he kind of overcame. It was extremely frustrating, right?
Mm.
And I'm not sure whether it's me as an audience perceiving as the writing kind of like falling back into the same old tropes again and revisiting the same thing over again, or my frustration with Don's character overall, like slipping back into that again. So that's something I think like it would take me a while to kind of unpack and process that, given that, I think I just saw the last episode of season 7 over the weekend.
Mm.
Yeah, so I'm still at a point whereby like there's a couple of hundred hours of Mad Men living in my head, and me trying to like unpick all of that is going to take a while. But yeah, I fully have no regrets spending that amount of time catching up on this extremely brilliant show in its own right. Um,
Yes. Um, to me, like what you saw as maybe a deficit, I saw as a strength because
um,
I thought Don Draper's character arc, or at least the cyclical nature of his character arc,
mhm.
was what the show was about. Mad Men was a show about men who didn't or couldn't change,
Yeah.
and about the women who could.
Mm,
I think no matter how many times the men of Sterling Cooper, all of them tried, the series always sent them back to their self-destructive routines that they knew best. I think
yeah.
those patterns could be anything from the liquor in their desk drawers to the women they slept with to the larger worldviews that kept them anchored to their own past. And
Yeah.
more often than not, it ensured that they sank. I think looking back to the pilot of Mad Men, which was like more than a decade ago, it is almost hilarious because the show knew from the get-go, unlike most pilots, knew from the get-go what it wanted Don Draper to be.
Yeah.
That that quote as Don was sitting by the bar. I'll do it old fashioned. That's his motto. On the flip side, we see more traditional character arcs for Peggy and Joan, people who are struggling to break out of their molds
Yeah.
and the glass ceilings that have been built for them. And that was the big contrast between the gendered roles in the show. I thought this depiction of Don Draper as this story of a man who desperately wanted to transform himself and never could was excellent. Mad Men's very first scene, right? It's
Yes.
Don Draper sitting in that restaurant booth surrounded by smoke and
Yeah.
other madmen who make their living selling American dreams, and he's kind of scribbling pictures of For Lucky Strike a napkin, and he grills a waiter about his favorite cigarette band, like marveling, at the man's unshakable loyalty, and he orders another drink, and that's when he says, I'll do this again, old
Yeah.
fashioned.
Mhm.
That is the show in a nutshell. The fact that this is Don's drink of choice is a little on the nose, but in true Mad Men fashion, that detail is also meticulously chosen. The more we get to know Don, the man, the constructed myth, the self-destructive legend, the less surprising it is that he returns again and again
Yeah.
to being an old-fashioned man. Um, Don's journey over 7 seasons of Mad Men is one of a man who wanted, with all his might, to be a different person, something made literal in the first season when it
Uh-huh.
was revealed that quote unquote Don was a big facsimile, I guess, hiding Dick Whitman, the scared boy who grew up in a brothel and
Yeah.
crafted himself a new, sleeker identity after the Korean War. And Mad Men real, I think, stroke of genius was it always brought Don to the brink of real change, only to yank him back again. He gives up drinking, gives in to drinking, gives it up, comes back again, comes back to it all over again, and he expresses interest in being a more involved parent, and then blinks in surprise when his daughter Sally appears to have grown up without him noticing.
Yeah.
um, Betty becomes sick of his shit and presses for a divorce.
Hmm.
He trades her for a more modern version of the model wife,
Yeah.
Megan,
Mm.
which also ends in divorce. He mentors Peggy more by accident than design, to be honest. And
Yeah.
he falls apart, stumbles back up, crumbles all over again, waiting for someone, usually some woman, to come and put him back together.
Yeah.
This is a real accurate depiction of humanity here. Like,
Yes.
people don't change. Matthew Weiner, it might not surprise you, was one of the hit writers of The Sopranos, another show that was very adamant that people don't change.
Yeah.
Similar to how James Gandolfini portrayed Tony Soprano, who was always on the brink of change, of being a better person, but he never did. He always gave in to his default impulses. And I
Mhm.
think that's what people really are. It's not a particularly hopeful view of the world, but it is ultimately a truthful view of the world.
Yeah.
Um, so much of Mad Men is not just about Dawn, though. I think every episode is packed with surprisingly really, really, really funny, almost workplace sitcom type moments alongside its dramatic moments.
Yeah.
There are things like a guy getting his foot chopped off by a lawnmower that is just so absurdly sitcom-y,
Yeah.
but so funny that like you kind of just accept it. The period accurate clothes, the costuming always won awards and it deserves to. The hairstyle and the music, often imaginative, hilarious, and deeply moving performances. Screenwriting that depicts the complexities and contradictions of the human personality with, I think, a lot more insight and empathy than 99% of all the American series to date.
Mhm.
It's a drama about how individuals are and are not affected by local, national, or international history
Yeah.
that's constantly unfolding around them. It's this great psychodrama about how our personalities are shaped by our parents,
Yeah.
our lovers, our friends, our bosses, everyone else we know, as well as the people we've never met, the politicians, the civil rights leaders, athletes, movie stars, culture in general, the icons who inspire and entertain and all of that. It has this unusually strong affinity for mythology, spirituality, religion, psychoanalysis, pop psychology, literature, poetry, cinema, and all the other means by which the human experience is transformed into a narrative. And at every level, every scene, the episodes, the seasons in total, I think, is quite masterful in its construction and filled with major and minor bits of foreshadowing and recollection and lines and images seeming to kind of be in conversation with each other throughout the seasons or throughout time.
Mhm.
And it manages to be all these things and others as it entertains. And it's really entertaining. It's exciting. It's sexy, sometimes sad.
Yeah.
But above all else, I think the thing that really hooked me and some of my friends who love the show, it's that it's funny. It's a show that inflicts so much darkness on its characters
Yeah.
and I think it's obligated to offer a bit of light as compensation. Otherwise, we wouldn't go near it. I've been watching or rewatching Mad Men. I think close to over a decade right now. I've seen every episode about 5 times at least.
Yeah.
And almost every time I notice new things. Sometimes they are micro, like, when the New Yorkers go to California, they always come back a bit sunburned. And sometimes it's the macro. Certain behavior patterns and characters are mirrored by what's happening in the nation over time.
Hmm.
More thematic parallels.
Yeah.
And while the series, I think, deals with history head on, it mostly avoids the temptation to explain what it all quote unquote meant. I think it prefers to view the biggest events obliquely, and cutting their potency by having characters hear the big news late or at a moment when their own personal problems seem much larger. And I think this rings true to life. Sometimes, like, it's that's just the way it is. Like, the Kennedy assassination may or may not be impactful to you, for example,
Hmm.
depending on what's going on in your life. And the show likes letting its characters be fascinated as it clearly is by Freud and Jung and the Bible and tarot cards. I think it's ultimately Enfi theory.
Yeah.
It's about human behavior occurring in the moment. It doesn't explain, it observes. And it's not about a period, it's about the question mark. And that's what I really, really, really loved about the show. It's like that line that Don delivers to Peggy in The Suitcase, where he says, people do things, full stop. you and that's great. What else did you love about Mad Men? If outside of its themes and all, like, what about the ensemble, the costuming,
Oh man.
different character arcs and things like that?
The I the costuming and the set, I think, in particular, really really stand out. Like it does feel extremely on point as far as it goes. Like the just the tailoring, the suits, the dresses, and all of that, very
Hmm.
reminiscent of that era, or or at least what a lot of us would imagine from that era, right? Like it feels like its own ad. The entire kind of like franchise feels like its own ad when it comes to the fashion of what the people are kind of wearing. Um,
Yep,
you know,
yep,
and I kind of love that, right? Like everyone is kind of like well, more or less, right? The majority of them are beautiful and have impeccable style, and it just feels very kind of lived in.
hmm,
And it's very difficult to like the cinematography and the editing and the pacing of it is extremely consistent throughout all
yep,
7 seasons, which I thoroughly appreciate as well. But what sticks out to
hmm,
me are these moments of almost magic realism that are peppered around,
yep,
that just add a nuance to it that uh much in the same way that the comedy provides relief for us at this kind of like dire points, right?
yep,
But the magical realism bit, I think the one that sticks out to me the most is when um like Megan leaves the company to pursue acting,
mm,
and then Don presses the lift and then he looks down the lift shaft, right? For example, like one of those moments
yep,
like that, like again, it is not it's unsubtle forewarning for sure. But at the same
hmm,
time, like it's just strange kind of moments like that. Or things
yep,
like Roger's kind of like LSD trip, his first LSD trip with Jane, and just the way they
yes,
chose to
yeah,
kind of play that out. Like there's these moments of artistry that are above beyond like the mainstay of what you expect from the show, that makes it kind of like
mm,
extra special because they don't overdo it. Like there's a point to showing all of that. That adds value to what you're watching. It adds an emotional layer there where that you can't quite shake. That this, as much as it feels grounded and realistic, it is also extremely fairy tale, right?
yep.
And fairy tale more like in the grim fairy tale version rather than like what we understand from a Disney fairy tale. Uh, and
It's about the myth of America.
yes,
That's what the fairy tale is.
yeah, and
Yeah,
I absolutely love it whenever these moments culminate, or rather, kind of like precipitate out within the story structure, just
yeah.
to give you something to kind of extra to kind of chew upon while you are grappling with the mistakes people are just constantly making on screen.
Yes, yes. 100% agree with you. What I really actually really liked about Mad Men at a time of prestige drama and serialized television
Yeah.
was that I feel like Mad Men never quite relied on a twist, or never relied on cliffhangers, or
Yeah.
never relied on, the super exciting shootouts or conflicts. And it proved to me that this is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
The season one twist that Don Draper was actually Dick Whitman was a big reveal, but the most shocking part was that the show didn't make a big deal out of it.
Yeah.
It wasn't this game-changing thing. True to character, like Don just brushes off Pete Campbell's discovery of his stolen identity,
Yeah.
and so does their boss, Bert Cooper. Don's identity crisis is a big part of the show and one of his defining character traits. But by staying true to his characters and to the fact that it's a show about flawed people, as you mentioned,
Mhm.
Mad Men stood out amongst all the other shows that were trying to desperately draw viewers in with kind of sensationalism. Another thing is, if you took any character from Mad Men and line him or her out, you you knew every single one of them to the micro detail.
Yes.
Every character in Mad Men of this large ensemble, from the big ones like Don and Roger and Pete and Joan, to Peggy, to even the smaller ones like Lane Harris or whatever.
Yeah.
You feel like you know and understand every character to the point where you're right there with them.
Yeah.
And no matter how deeply flawed and awful they are, some of them are so awful, and we're looking at you, Pete. Um,
Yes.
you love them and you care about what happens to
Yeah.
them. The same is true with like Ken Cosgrove or Harry Kane or Paul Kinsey or Ted Cho. Like
Yeah.
there's so many great characters here. There is no Walt Jr., for example, who was just Walt Jr. from season one to whenever Breaking Bad ended, right?
Yeah. And yes,
he was just
it's just about the
he
breakfast.
was
Yeah.
correct, yeah. And I'm not even going to delve into the relationship aspects yet because we'll talk about Don and Peggy and all of that a little bit later.
Yep.
I love that this was a primarily episodic show.
Yes.
In an era when it wasn't cool to be episodic. Every single episode felt like a short story. Matthew Weiner and his team of writers definitely took advantage of these captivating characters and the incredible actors, and they made a lot of episodes that focus on secondary characters and some that only focus on the main cast. So each episode feels like a short story in a book collection that ties together in the end.
Mhm.
Standout episodes like Three Sundays or The Suitcase or Signal 30 and stuff like that were all very con- contained short stories.
Yeah.
Um, the show's style is probably its most obvious aspects. The costumes, the makeup, the hair, the sets, it's all a work of art.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
set in the 1960s and some of it in the 70s, and it would have been easy for Mad Men to go cheesy, but it didn't.
Yeah.
With a great team that did a lot of research, the show felt more real because the world looked just as real as the characters felt, I think.
Mhm.
Mad Men did something that a lot of shows did not do. It made characters look bad. Specifically in the earlier seasons, Peggy isn't hip and doesn't
Yeah.
know how to dress or
Yeah.
style her hair.
Mhm.
But instead of the typical just, throwing a pair of glasses on the actress and revealing how beautiful she is when she takes them off, that old cliche, like it takes time for Peggy to get to know her personal style and confidence. And her character arc is mirrored by her costuming,
Yes.
which is great. Universally, the performances are amazing. Everyone from John Hamm and Peggy Olsen, which is and Elizabeth Moss, which is the obvious, to your Betty Drapers, to Kernan Shipka in her first role,
Oh
your
yeah.
your eventual Sabrina. They were all great. Like no matter how big or small their roles were.
Yeah.
Um, this takes place 50 years ago. It's historical and it's an important part of the show, but the
Mhm.
human stories make it very relatable. And its deeper themes of consumerism and capitalism makes it still relevant today because all the points, all the good and bad points of capitalism or consumerism that Mad Men brought up has just become more fully blown lah
Yeah.
in 2022 right now. Like nothing has really changed. In fact, some parts of it are worse. Sure, there isn't the misogyny or the lack of female execs and opportunities and stuff like that. But is that really true?
Mhm.
Really, or is it just hidden? So much about Mad Men really captures me. Um, those are like the peripheral things, right?
Yeah.
But let's delve into the main things, and we can't delve into the main things without talking more about Don Draper.
Yes.
Like you pointed out to me that you were frustrated by his I think lack of growth or lack of a traditional arc that you would see in a show, right?
Mhm.
And I thought that rather on the flip side, I thought rather that his lack of growth is sort of the point of the show.
Yes.
What else did you like or dislike about Don Draper, either in terms of John Hamm's performance or his character moments or arcs and stuff like that? Like does the idea that Don Draper is not supposed to grow, does it like change your opinion of it?
Um Okay, certainly, like having this discussion about his lack of growth over time, right? I think
Hmm.
it also has to do with the fact that the show does promise these moments of, where he's on the precipice of breakthrough, right? Like he starts
Yeah.
swimming more, he gets a little bit more sick, he might have TB, and
Yep.
he cuts down on smoking, cuts down on drinking, etc., etc. Like there are these moments in time where it kind of feels like that, and that's mirror in, maybe like Sterling's like LSD trip where he becomes a bit more enlightened,
Hmm.
and so on and so forth. What to me, I think, really highlights the fact that Don Draper as a character is a facsimile, right, or almost like a
Yeah.
caricature of itself, is sometimes within the conversations that he
Mm.
has in day to day, um,
Mm. Mm.
right? Because
You're right. Yep.
those conversations consist largely of these one-liners that he throws out to them. And the fact that
Mm.
these one-liners or these like kind of dismissive comments that he gives, especially to his creative team, right,
Yep.
serve as the end all and be all of the conversation when the
Yep.
conversation actually didn't take a conversation did not take place in the first place, is
Mm.
very frustrating, right? And it serves to highlight the fact that like Don Draper as a person is not kind of fully there, right? It's
Yep.
only in these moments um with Peggy, for example, right, when he is most himself, that they actually have good
Mm.
conversations, right?
Or Anna also
Oh,
lah.
oh yeah, and I think to some extent, maybe what was that um stats girl Miller, to
Mm.
some extent, which was like kind of like the start of like some sort of self awareness where he opens up about his past.
Yep.
There are portions of it where he opens up to Megan, but that is like few and far between, and those moments of vulnerability get covered up very quickly because of the drama within their marriage itself.
Mm. Yeah.
But like I think truly it has to do with like this iteration of Draper that we get to see the biggest part of, right? It has to do when he is alone with Peggy and they have these very terse, if but extremely powerful conversations with each other, right?
Mm.
A lot of it devolves into kind of like a screaming match at some point in time. But it gives
Yep.
us the meat and a peek into the actual character of Dick Whitman slash Don Draper, as
Hmm.
he is as a person, as opposed to this put on facade that he carries every day when he walks into the office. Um,
Yes. Yeah. Dawn is an ad that he created for himself.
yes,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's all like kind of these little things that reinforce, the myth of Don Draper, right? The mythos behind this ad man who, is self-made. It's
Mm.
fascinating that he goes from kind of like a mysterious background to eventually claiming the fact that he's from the Boondocks, as part
Yep.
of his story in a
Hmm.
very unnervingly comfortable and smooth way, where and no one
Mm.
questions it, right? Because like that's just part of the appeal, and the enigma of Draper.
Yeah, Don Draper is this giant mirror to white male America, like isn't it? Like the myth of America, what it pretends to be, what it shapes itself,
Yeah,
the myth making that is made for itself. That is Don, and I love that he is not just a fully fleshed out character, and we know him quite intimately, but he also has this double edge, this double layer as like this allegory for America. And
yeah,
that's really really great. We were talking about Peggy's costuming, right?
yes,
What I loved most about Don Draper was that he never changed his style. Even as everyone around him embraced the new trends of an evolving world, even when they were going into the 70s,
yeah,
right? He just chose not to change, and that is quite true of his character as well. It's all very purposeful, everything from his style to his
yeah,
affectations to his dialogue, as you said, it's all very purposeful writing. Don is at the same time also one of the most deeply felt TV characters ever. I think he's right up there with your Tony
yeah,
Sopranos and your Walter Whites and Jesse Pinkmans and all of that. And his performance reveals more layers every time I watch it. But at some point, Mad Men made it clear that Don's slow and steady breakdown was never going to end, and he was never going to change.
yeah.
And which leads to, I'm jumping ahead a bit, but
Sure.
which leads to I think one of the greatest series finales I've ever seen. Don runs away to California,
Yes.
his place of choice to do drugs with hippies and escape himself. He's
Yes.
trying to find some semblance of peace and change. But last we see of him is this placid expression as he attempts meditation, and you think, wow, he's achieved a sense of zen,
Uh huh.
a sense of calmness, a sense of himself. Then the series cuts to the famous 1971 "I'd like to buy the world a Coke" ad,
Mm-hmm.
which plays Madman out for good.
Yeah.
In many interviews afterwards, Wiener was very explicit in saying that uh, then was very explicit in saying that the show, uh, within the world of the show, Don Draper created that ad,
Yeah.
which confirms a truth about Don that the show never shied away from. Here is a man who wants to be better, but in times of trouble and in times of crisis and self-reflection, he will always go back to what he already knows.
Yeah.
And I found that to be a perfect ending for the show. The truth about Dawn couldn't have been surprising, I think, to anyone who watched the show's first episode. And
Mm-hmm.
he also takes in the first episode a seemingly transformative experience.
Yeah.
And what does he do? He turns it into an ad.
Mm-hmm.
The breakthrough moment of the pilot, in fact, comes when like Dawn snagged the Lucky Strike account by appealing to a room of powerful men with a very simple pitch.
Yeah.
Advertising is based on one thing: happiness. And you know what happiness is? Um, it's the smell of a new car. It's freedom. It's billboard on the side of the road that screams reassurance that whatever you're doing is okay.
Yeah.
You are okay. All Don Draper wanted to be was happy, but all Don knew how to do was create facsimiles of happiness.
Yes.
So he never found a way to make a real thing. On the flip side, his female counterparts, against much greater odds than Don Draper did, actually achieved what he wanted.
Yep.
Peggy is arguably the show's not arguably she is the Jesse Pinkman to his Walter White,
Oh.
the
Mhm.
second most important character of the show, right?
Absolutely.
Um, Most dynamic storyline of the show, in my opinion, from the start. The pilot sort of only shows glimmers of what's to come for Peggy, but her journey is the most purposefully progressive Mad Men ever did. And thanks to Elizabeth Moss, who did not ever win an Emmy for Peggy Olsen, which is a fucking crime. She only ever won an Emmy for The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, she's owed 7 Emmys for all 7 seasons of Mad Men.
Absolutely.
She started as Don's secretary, but quickly revealed a wit and a cleverness and a drive that made her Don's most obvious creative successor, right?
Mhm.
And eventually, she carved out her own place in a sort of relentlessly misogynistic advertising industry by kind of sheer force of will
Yeah.
and undeniably sharper instincts. And one of the most interesting aspects of Peggy's character arc is that she didn't necessarily want to be a pioneer.
Mhm.
You get the feeling that if she were around today, she might even deride affirmative action as unnecessary or pitiful, and denigrates the value of hard work.
Yeah.
But by the simple virtue of being a woman who pushed past a constant onslaught of kind of sexist bullshit to get what she wanted, Peggy grew into this force that dared the men in the show to reckon with her brilliance and smirked when she got the better of them.
Yeah.
The first season of Mad Men made plain the parallels between Peggy's story of discovering her creative voice and Dawn having done the same, and the series continued to develop her trajectory into something more complex and fascinating, more so even than Dawn's. Did Peggy's arc surprise you, thrill you? Like, what do you love about Peggy Olsen, which I think is almost the Kim Wexler of Mad Men?
Oh man. I love Peggy's arc because I feel that it feels like the most straightforward.
Yep.
Kind of that, like, she takes every setback, every lesson, every encounter, every experience in her stride, right? And uses
Mm,
that to propel her forward. I think
yep.
the easiest sort of comparison that we can kind of make, or rather the most regular kind of comparison can make, is between Peggy and Joan, right?
Yeah.
Joan's
Yeah.
journey to having everything, right? Both as a woman, as a professional within the sphere of what she's doing, right, is far more complicated and far more winding than well, sometimes than necessary. Personally, I think. Whereas Peggy as a mirror to Dawn, right, in different shoes, definitely feels more straightforward and more satisfying
Mm,
because of that, and because we are following so many characters and all their arcs kind of at the same time, right? Whether it's Dawn's like perpetual cycle, whether it's Pete's kind of like Pete growing into a monster basically,
mm,
or whether it's like just like Roger floating in the wind, all of that, none of it is as satisfying as what Peggy goes through because it feels hard won and well earned.
Yep.
Both as a literal thing that she's doing in her career, but also
Mhm.
in terms of like the amount of time that she spends working through those the objections, the rejections,
Yeah.
and the different like poor choices romantically, all of those
Mm.
things, like eventually culminate into a success story that you are like, yeah, I've been rooting for you since the start of that, right? Like, fuck Don, fuck all these guys, right? Like
Yeah.
Peggy can have everything that she wants, and she's gonna get it because she's gonna learn how to get there.
Yes, one of the best images of that ended, I think, season 5, or was it season 6? Peggy leaning on the couch in Don's office as a mirror to the opening credits
Yes.
was fantastic.
Yep.
By the way, this is quite an aside, lah. Like, I'm sorry to sidetrack
No,
here,
no, no.
but the fucking opening credits is one of the best opening credits I've ever seen.
Yes.
It's
Absolutely.
phenomenal. Like whoever designed that is, it still sticks in my head as one of the most memorable opening credits of the prestige drama era, an era which
Yeah.
frequently did not have opening credits. Like they just threw that out. Breaking Bad didn't have, well, Breaking Bad had one now, but it was like 3 seconds. Same thing with the rest of the prestige drama shows. Mad Men had opening credits, and
Yeah.
I appreciate it for that. I would never skip a Mad Men opening
No,
credits.
yeah, I
It's
have never skipped that. I mean, like having binged that, right? Like clearly, it would save me collectively a lot of time over that. But I've never skipped the credits, right? There's something
yeah.
so it sets the tone every time,
Mm,
right? And like just the opening theme song is so kind of like iconic.
yep.
And yeah, for some reason, like just like you said, right? It's so well designed. It's so evocative in terms of like the look and the style of that, to the themes
Mhm.
of everything that's going on. And yeah, I haven't skipped a single one, and I've seen it more than 100 times, right, over the last couple of
Yep.
months.
Yep. Um, on the character side of it, as you mentioned about Dawn and Peggy and Joan, I think Roger is also sort of a mirror of Dawn.
Yeah.
He also to Roger Sterling actually is low key my favorite character on the show because he's so funny.
Oh, really?
It's fucking hilarious. I
Yeah.
mean, he's not meant to be like exceptionally deep,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
For sure.
he's like there as comedic relief a lot. But character wise, also he falls for this promise of a younger woman, much like Dawn did. Like both of them fell into the 50s era vision of a happy life. The housewife, 2.5 kids, and all that.
Yeah.
Roger is the first one to break out of it, even before Dawn does.
Yes.
He steps ahead of Dawn. He's divorced again. He gets into LSD culture. He convinces himself he's changed for the better, but discovers when the drugs wear off that he's as miserable as he is before. Um, the contrast between Peggy and Dawn is very interesting. As you were talking about, like both started as secretaries, both are very strong and intelligent, yet their choices diverge completely.
Yeah.
Peggy breaks the mold and pursues a career, and she struggles to maintain meaningful relationships. Joan, on the other hand, succumbs to societal pressure and marries and starts a family,
Yeah.
yet still longs for the professional recognition that Peggy has earned.
Yes.
And I think these conflicts aren't unique to the 60s. They're just very well crystallized by that period.
Yes.
Is this phantomness, or is the phantom of happiness?
Hmm.
It just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody ended up very happy at the end of Mad Men. And
No.
let's talk a little bit about Joan now, because I think Joan is very interesting as
Oh
well.
yeah.
Um, Watching the first episode of Mad Men, I think this is the most obvious character that Matthew Weiner didn't have plans for.
Mm.
Joan Holloway, like
Yeah.
she's not much more than this like sashaying column of red strutting through the office and trying to show Peggy the ropes. And,
Hmm.
she assures Peggy that the typewriter might look complicated, but the man who designed it made it simple enough for a woman to use, and then instructs her new hire to go home, put a paper bag over her head, and assess where her strengths and weaknesses are.
Yeah.
And quote unquote, be honest. She's basically the leader of the sorority that is the Sterling Cooper stenography pool,
Yeah.
and who will betide the secretary or drooling man who dares cross her. But according to Matthew Weiner, Christina Hendricks herself, the actress, made it impossible for him not to give Joan more.
Yeah.
Um, what the character herself calls something in between a mother and a waitress in that first episode.
Hmm.
In Hendricks's hands, Joan didn't just show Peggy around. She looked like she was surveying her territory. Like she transcended the script.
Yeah.
She wielded, the smiled and swaying hips like well-honed weapons of charm. And when somebody pissed her off, like her eyes are furious,
Yeah.
kind of foreshadowing righteous wrath to come. That was not in the script, that was in the actress. And
Hmm.
soon enough, it became impossible to ignore the fact that, that Christina Hendricks was too good to be given a minor role,
Yeah.
and Joan became this thing. Like Joan was too smart to be satisfied with corralling lunch orders, and her ambitions grew despite her more, I would say, practical judgment,
Yeah.
and morphed to leap beyond the men in her life who disappointed or devastated her. If you only knew Joan from the pilot, the fact that the series ends with Joan offering Peggy a partnership in her own production company will be mind-boggling,
Yeah.
as it would be thrilling.
Yeah.
I think Joan, like Peggy, didn't necessarily set out to become more than what the world told her
Yeah.
she could be. A decently smart girl who can make some man moderately happy someday, but Mad Men nonetheless lifted Joan and Peggy's fight to be taken seriously, a fight that they won
Hmm.
as pointed counterparts to its men who are just stuck in their own time loops, of self pity and self defeat. Um, yeah, I really really liked Joan. What about you? Like, what do you think about Joan's whole trajectory? Like, this was the only character that I felt wasn't purposeful from the beginning. Like, this is someone that Matthew Weiner wrote for as the show went on.
Yeah, I think like when we kind of caught up when I was midway through, like I had just crested past season three, like
Yep.
venturing into new territory for myself, right? I was saying like, yeah, I totally had a change of heart about like Joan and what her character was like, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think the point at which that really cemented it for me was when
Yep.
she dresses down Peggy shortly after Peggy fires Joey for the extremely inappropriate cartoon that
Mm.
he draws, right? Like
Yes. Yes.
that
Yeah.
really short kind of exchange that the two of them have in Joan's office shows Joan's grasp of an extremely deep understanding of the politics of the office together with like the power play of just generally society um at that time, right, where women stand, where men stand, where privilege stands, and all of that,
Mm-hmm.
like in the few moments there, that you are, you're a big player, power player now, and I'm just another helpless secretary, like
Yep.
so on point, so like kind of amazing, the conversations that they then have from then on, and a lot of them eventually like kind of like bitching about Megan and so on and so forth. Those few secrets that they share in behind closed doors in Joan's office, right, has the camaraderie of it.
Mm.
Those moments have more camaraderie, right, and comradeship between these two women than
Yep.
all
Yep.
of the drinking and merrymaking and money that's being spent among any of the male characters. And I think
Agreed. Yeah.
that is amazing. The
Mm-hmm.
way they're kind of like able to capture that. Like these were two actresses kind of like at the peak of their powers in their understanding of both their characters and their roles within the show. And having
Mm-hmm.
them kind of like flex that was such a joy to watch.
Yes.
Joan coming into her own and all the very, very difficult decisions that she had to make, the compromises that she had to make along her journey to the top.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it feels more tragic than Peggy's in a lot of ways.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
again, like her resilience is, it feels different from Peggy's, right? Like
Mm.
Peggy, hmm, like Peggy's kind of like hit strong unrelenting willingness to keep moving forward dif- um despite setbacks or obstacles and all of that feels very different from kind of like Joan's very cunning and wily and calculated um,
Mm.
approach to things, right? Despite the show often showing her to be extremely taken by her own emotions and the situations that she finds herself with, but she
Yep.
always finds that composure. She always comes back to a place of like of clarity in which to kind of make her moves from there, and that is like,
Mm.
oh wow, it's I mean, Christina Hendricks as Joan, like, is so many hair standing kind of moments from her that when you get that in a particular episode, like I don't care what happens to the men in those episodes, right? Like
Mm.
there's the rest of the things there are usually not as memorable as those very short scenes that we get to see Joan do her thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Joan was great. Let's talk about someone who's not so great right now, but also a very integral part of the show. Pete Campbell, who is
Oh God.
sort of like the Christopher Moltisanti of Mad Men. He is slimy,
Yeah.
selfish, and generally speaking, a very awful guy. But somehow also one of the best parts of the show, and
Yes.
if not necessarily being a good person, but he is one of the most entertaining parts of the show. And
Yeah.
yet, as he gets worse with every season, there is some part of you that sort of cares about him and wants to see the rare occasions where his good side comes
Yeah.
out. And that complexity is wholly down to not just the writing, but by Vincent Kartheiser, who you kind of forget that they're separate people, that he just loses himself in this role so well.
Yeah.
I encountered Vincent Kartheiser as in a show called Angel, which is a Buffy spin-off.
Hmm.
He played Angel's son, and I just never knew he had this kind of like depth to him.
Yeah.
He also speaks probably the second most quoted line in the show, besides "That's what the money is for,"
Yeah.
which we'll get to later when we talk about the suitcase. But not great, Bob, is something I say a lot for no reason,
Yeah.
and that's because of Vincent Kartheiser's delivery of "Not great, Bob," which is amazing.
Yeah.
It's one of the best lines the show has ever delivered.
Yes.
What do you think about Pete Campbell?
Oh God. He is unlikable to begin with, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like self-righteous, has a high horse that he constantly preaches from. There
Mm.
are moments, especially in the first couple of seasons, where you can see why he believes that he has the right to preach from that high horse, right? Like
Yep.
he stands on this soapbox and kind of like philosophizes a lot about like the moral standing of like loyalty and whether something is right or wrong. And in certain moments, that rings very true because he does make decisions according to that moral compass. But I think Pete Campbell is the perfect example of the idea that every compromise leads you to more compromise, right? With
Mm.
your life. And eventually, some of the things that he preaches against, he falls into, right?
Mm.
And when it eventually becomes a means to an end for him,
Yep.
uh, that's when you really start to see him tear away at this like human skin suit and the monster comes out. Uh,
Yes.
but at the same time, because there's always just enough glimmer of good and compassion and humanity in him,
Mm-hmm.
you're like, oh, okay, there might be some kind of like redemption story there.
Yep.
But yeah, man, Pete is skeezy as fuck by the end of this series.
Mm.
And yeah, it is extremely compelling for what I thought at the beginning would be a really kind of like small side character. Uh,
Yes.
you know,
Um. Yeah. I mean, he is constantly entertaining. There are certain moments when he gets taken down.
yes.
That's always great, when he loses it and says "Not great, Bob." It's a gif that lives rent free in my head. His boxing fight with Lane in
Oh
the
my god,
office
yes.
is probably one of the favorite scenes from like many Mad Men
Yeah,
fans. He is so great here. Yeah, that was Pete. But let's get into probably the show's most compelling dynamic. It's not John and his wife Betty, or poor Betty,
yeah,
who I have a lot of sympathy for and is an important character as well.
yes,
But Dawn and Peggy is probably the central dynamic of the show that drives it forward.
for sure.
And that is the core relationship of the show. Peggy starts off the series as Dawn's secretary, and she was chosen because Joe knew that Dawn wouldn't want to sleep with her.
Mm,
And that although Peggy and Dawn never have a sexual relationship or date with each other,
yeah,
their platonic friendship or platonic um, professional relationship
yes.
is the most romantic relationship I've seen on television.
Yeah, we had a discussion
Uh,
about this. The most
yes,
non-romantic romantic line ever.
yes, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to hire you. Dawn essentially took Peggy in as a protege, and Dawn was there for Peggy in one of the worst moments of her life.
Yeah.
The surprise Pete Campbell baby, which would be the worst moment of any woman's life if finding out you're pregnant with Pete Campbell's kid,
Oh yeah.
and he guides her through that. He guides her throughout her career, even at her toughest moment. He was the only one from the office that knew what happened to Peggy and visited her in the hospital.
Yeah.
He's also her toughest critic, and she's also his toughest
Oh
critic.
yeah.
They are tough on each other because they love each other in a way, and their relationship always remains platonic, which makes it more beautiful than any other relationship on the show or in TV in general,
Yeah.
just because it doesn't ever go where you think a typical TV show would take you. You know,
Mhm.
it almost revels in their platonic respect for each other, that they are mirror images of each other. And as Don explains to Peggy in the suitcase, the main reason why he's never slept with her is not because she's unattractive. It's because she's the first woman that Don has ever taken seriously,
Yeah.
or showed respect in a professional capacity, and he didn't want to ruin that with Peggy.
Yeah.
Their relationship is fantastic and probably the driving force of the show. Right up to their final conversation in the final episode.
Mhm.
What do you think about Don and Peggy?
Oh man. Like the show wouldn't work without that
Mm.
dynamic, right?
Oh, would it work as well, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult. Again, like what they say behind closed doors to each other when they are alone, right?
Mm.
When most of it behind closed doors, right, is some sort of like, is something sexy, something illicit, what that's going
Yeah.
on. The few moments behind doors with Peggy and Dawn are the few moments of like bare truth
Mm.
that is available, right?
Yeah.
And I think what catches me the most is for the first time she addresses him as Don. Right. I
Mm.
think it was a pep talk given to Peggy by Joan, where she just like, you have to like address him as your equal before he's gonna start taking it as equal. The moment she says Don, right? I mean, John Hammond, it's amazing kind of like face acting, has
Yeah.
this kind of like twinge almost, but also a look of recognition for like, okay, like this is different now. Like there's something like moving ahead in this conversation that it's gonna be. And while I
Mm.
don't remember what that actual conversation was like, uh,
Mm-hmm.
those moments are very precious and very important because they are so rare in like the literal kind of like runtime of the entire series,
Yeah.
and there are just these bare moments where Don is most himself, as is
Yeah.
Peggy, amidst
Yeah.
all the shiny print ads and all the taglines and all of that. You get the truest of two people, and that is a
Mm.
rarity in the Madman world, and that gives us enough to kind of like not power through necessarily. Like the rest of it is enjoyable as well, but those are powerful scenes
Mm-hmm.
that I feel like are incredibly important. And you see that it's always in these scenes where they are negotiating with each other, they're fighting with each other, they're looking for common ground to bridge some sort of gap in understanding or ideas, where they are the most full as characters, as opposed to all the workplace nonsense that they have right in like the daytime in the open
Mm-hmm.
door office, right, where he's throwing money in her face,
Mm-hmm.
or she's just like swallowing her pride and all of that.
Yeah.
uh yeah, those incredibly like emotionally charged but at the same time tender moments that lend this dynamic more meat than almost any other relationship in the show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Before we delve into the final topic, which will be our favorite episodes, I want to talk about the writing on the show, which I think is something that sticks out probably most prominently, even more than the costuming or the
Oh yeah,
performances.
for sure.
The writing is so thick with both visual metaphor and symbolic metaphors
Yep.
and underseen metaphors. It's everything on the show means something, from a pile of papers out in the focus in the background to a character's tie to a moment when Joan takes off her bra and you see, those marks on her rib cage, sort of symbolic of the constraints that have been put on her.
Yep.
The show is written and produced, I think, very much like a book. It's often a literary journey because it delves into these characters very deeply, and every episode feels like a new chapter, or every scene a new page, and every season and episode of Mad Men has a general theme.
Yep.
And the writers leave a lot up to the viewers to interpret.
Hmm.
It's not spoon feeding you its themes, but it shows you just enough that you understand, at least on a subliminal level, what's happening, even if you can't articulate it.
Yep.
It's obviously its major themes is identity and memory,
Yep.
gender and sexuality in the 60s, alcoholism, counterculture. Um, Everything is there both in the foreground and in the background. What are your favorite aspects of Mad Men's writing, or the themes that it was trying to develop over the course of 7 seasons?
Oh man. That is a lot to kind of tackle. I think
Mm.
let's go with scenes. Some of my favorite scenes
Yeah.
that I've had, the one that stands out to me the most, I think might be a little bit surprising, but it is the
Mm.
scene where Sally in a tantrum at the office
Yeah.
runs out and is picked up by Megan after she falls. Oh
Yes.
my god. For some reason that scene really, really strikes me, right? That looks like something out of an ad. And in that
Mm.
lingering moment where Megan is kind of kneeling down and comforting Sally and the rest of the women in Dawn's life, right? From Dr. Miller
Yep.
to Joan, and all of them are kind of like standing there watching this happen. That was such a poignant scene, right? And that sets up like a big part of, going into the rest of the season and Don's relationship with Megan, setting up yet another cycle of destruction for him and his relationships in his life, right?
Mm.
But wow, that to me was an extremely, extremely powerful scene. Of course,
Yes.
the conversation in the suitcase, for sure, that is one of
Mm.
the most emotionally charged, rawest scene that we get as well. I love
Mm.
that. I love the moments of Dawn in California,
Yes. Yeah.
with the strange royalty princess, whatever thing that
Mm-hmm.
the uber rich, right? Like
Yeah.
that uber
Yeah.
rich, that was such a strange sequence of scenes that felt surreal and kind of added to the magical realism like I was talking about earlier as well. I really, really love those. There's so
Yes.
many kind
Yeah.
of like great scenes there,
Yeah.
um that just us simply kind of stand out and like live in my mind constantly for how beautiful and poignant and meaningful and layered they are,
Mm-hmm.
more so than like the themes are very, very strong, right, and very consistent throughout all the writing and very
Yeah.
period accurate. I
Mm.
love whenever they bring in something from that time period that was of natural, national, or global importance. The
Mm.
assassination of JFK, Marilyn Monroe dying, the
Mm.
assassination
Moon
of
landing.
the
Yeah.
moon landing, all of that, right, being worked into this historical fiction,
Yep. Yep.
is
Yeah.
so well done and feels so natural,
Mm.
that you have to like applaud it, right? Like, because so many shows don't do that any justice, um
Yeah.
and it makes it feel very real, right, as a part of, or at least the possibility that this happened sometime in our past.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are certain moments in history that changes public consciousness or how we think of ourselves and things like that, right? The assassination, the moon landing, stuff like that. And it's very organic to the show that they have to consider this because these are people who have to consider public consciousness and how to adapt selling strategies, a very consumeristic way to view it,
Yeah.
to shifting cultural identities alongside their own personal identities. And I think like this whole idea of identity is the show's like overriding leitmotif, right?
Yeah.
Don Draper's identity fraud is probably the biggest one lah during the Korean War. He it's he's this guy who's been living a lie for a long time. He's built to be a loner, and over the course of all these many seasons, we see him carry this existential angst through a fairy tale of his own creation. And the show also takes you into the identity crafted to sell things. It takes us behind the scenes of the branding of American icons like Lucky Strike cigarettes and Hilton hotels and Life cereal to tell us um, not how the products themselves were created, but how their very sexy, very magical images were dreamed up.
Yeah.
And in this way, like the show puts us in the shoes of Don Draper, obsessed with selling an image rather than tending to what lies underneath.
Yeah.
And that shows Draper's fatal flaw, right? It's his lack of psychological awareness. It's a weird contradiction because he is at once perfectly tuned into the desires of America,
Yeah.
while entirely out of touch with his own character. And that's the key theme of Mad Men. And the key theme of Mad Men is like no one is ever who they appear to be.
Yeah.
Each one, from Peggy to Joan to Roger to everyone, is filled with thwarted ambition and frustrated dreams. None more so than Don Draper himself,
Mhm.
whose closet, which is gradually revealed over the seasons, is sort of filled with proverbial skeletons. And
Yeah.
we've touched upon gender and sexuality in the 1960s. It's probably the sexism in particular is probably almost the most suffocating and the least fun to watch
Oh yeah.
aspect to the show.
Hmm.
But it's also the force against which the most compelling female characters struggle, and
Yes.
the opposition that defines them. So they couldn't be there without honestly depicting the sexism of the era. The interaction with everyday misogyny and condescension, the housewife whose psychologist reports to her husband, the ad woman who's cut out of the after hours wheeling and dealing. It gives the characters purpose and shape. This is all great. It deals with the alcoholism of the era, which was not seen as unusual.
Yeah.
Three martini lunches and keeping a bottle in your desk is not unusual.
Yeah.
It also delves into the counterculture of the late 60s and early 70s, which is actually one of the most
Mm-hmm.
interesting points of Mad Men as a series, when Don and all these old timers are forced to reckon with the fact that their time is done.
Yeah.
They are gone. Every character almost depicts a sort of version or an archetype of people you see in the 60s, which is not to say that they are one dimensional at all,
Yes.
but Don is the ever charming salesman who is always well groomed and well witted. Roger Sterling is from the previous generation, the greatest generation, the war generation, right? Who created empires in the 50s, but slowly in decline as time progresses. Pete actually signifies the youngsters who are actively in pursuit of
Yeah.
greatness and the ways to rise on the corporate ladder. Peggy and Joan represent the women who make it big
Mm-hmm.
due to sheer talent, but are still sidelined due to the predominant sexism of the
Yeah.
era. Betty is a classic 60s woman whose ultimate aim was to maintain their beauty, marry into a rich household, and become the perfect housewife.
Yeah.
Sally represents the boomer generation who grew up with poor parenting but turned out to be independent. Um, they're all archetypes but not caricatures, and that's what I really love about the show. They managed to make these allegorical characters fully fleshed out on their own,
Mm-hmm.
and that's something a lot of shows do. They don't do very well because they run into the problem of making character symbols
Mm.
rather than actual people, whereas everyone here is an actual person.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any like final thoughts before we delve into the best episodes of the show?
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Uh, Sorry.
y-
Yeah. Final thoughts before best episodes of the show.
oh, okay. I had this kind of like passing thought where I was talking about
Yep.
I was thinking about the whole idea of like family names and how that usually, I mean, or traditionally tied in to the
Mm.
idea of like the jobs that you do, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was fascinating to me, like the whole idea of Don as a draper, right? I know
Yep.
it's not his actual name, but that's what he does. Like he drapes, these wonderful, colorful things over products, right? Or the idea
Mm-hmm.
that Sterling has been born with a silver spoon in his mouth, etc., etc. Or the
Mm-hmm.
fact that Lane Price is the money guy, and eventually his downfall is the money. You know,
Mm.
it was just one of those kind of strange coincidences that had niggled at me while I was watching the show. I was like, oh man, I hope that's intentional because it feels too intentional to be like a kind of accident as that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but just like one of the final weird things that popped into my head while watching the series.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. Now let's delve into our favorite episodes of the show, which is the final topic of this episode.
Yeah.
What is I'll let you pick. Like, what are your favorite episodes of the show?
Oh man, given that there are just so many,
Yep.
okay, Suitcase for sure.
All right. Let's talk about the suitcase first as like our number ones, and I would agree. Like the suitcase is, I think, the pinnacle of what Mad Men was.
Yeah.
And it's so great in terms of delving into what we already talked about, the Peggy and Don's relationship.
Yep.
It's this question of how many people in the world really know you. A handful at best if you're lucky. Maybe a spouse or lover or sibling or close friend or some combination maybe. Don Draper is not so fortunate. Through his own choices, right?
Yeah.
And then through the fickle fingers of fate, he's come to believe himself that he's a closed book to the world, except to the real Don Draper's widow, Anna.
Hmm.
And with her, he felt free to be himself, to be vulnerable and sweet Dick Whitman, but and not the son of a bitch role that he's adopted in Korea and cultivated in the years
Yeah.
since. And without her, he feels completely and utterly lost, and that's what the suitcase is about. But as Peggy points out in the climax, right,
Yeah.
the high points of the show, Anna isn't the only person who knows Don.
Yeah.
Peggy knows him, and she always has. And maybe because she can pull him out of his spiral he's been in since his marriage ended. Peggy is probably the most important character to Don at the moment.
Yeah.
An argument could be made that the man that Peggy knows so well isn't really him. you might say that Anna knew Dick Whitman
Yes.
and Peggy knows Don Draper.
Uh huh.
But it's more complicated than that. Peggy has met Dick. Dick Whitman is the one who visited her in the psych ward after her baby was born.
Mm.
That wasn't Don Draper, that was Dick Whitman. And he taught her a lesson that he learned from the hobo code. Um, Pete tried to tell her the same story while Don was AWOL in California,
Yeah.
and Peggy shut that down. And after their impromptu birthday dinner at the Greek diner, he casually offers up pieces of the Dick Whitman puzzle. He mentions Korea,
Yeah.
he mentions Uncle Mac, he mentions his father who died in front of him, getting kicked by a horse, his mother, etc.
Yeah.
Like Peggy doesn't have the details of the Dick Whitman picture, but she has enough of it.
Yes.
And more importantly, she knows Don Draper even better than Anna did. She's been his secretary, his protege, his partner, and the closest thing he has to his friend. If anyone can help him through this rough patch, it's Peggy. And this entire hour spent with Peggy and Don crafting an ad or pitch for Samsonite.
Yeah.
Samsonite,
Yes.
right?
Samsonite.
Is probably the greatest insight you'll get into both Don and Peggy and how they interplay with each
Yeah.
other. Is that what you loved about the suitcase?
Yes, pretty much that's kind of
Yeah.
all of it, right? Like that I think was the most insightful culmination of their relationship up to that point in the series,
Mm.
and that continued to carry through for the remaining 3 seasons, right?
Yes.
Yeah, really really love that. Yeah, I think the other one that I liked as well, and interestingly enough, it has to do with like the two women that Don never sleeps with. Is the
Mm.
one where Joan gets served her divorce papers.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
I can't
Yep.
remember what the episode is called, but yeah, that one again, right? Like there is a moment where it's just two people who are playing at their lives, right? At that point in time, right?
Mm.
Like one is, happy, successful kind of ad man with this niggling feeling that what he has is not real or not enough.
Hmm.
And a woman who is supposed to be kind of like all kind of put together, whose life
Yep.
is literally falling apart as they both sit there at the bar.
Hmm.
Yeah, I fucking love that. That scene, I think more so. I don't remember what else is in that episode, but
Hmm.
also one of my favorite things, right? Where we explore kind of this relationship where the dynamic is vastly different from all of other Don's, dynamics with women in,
Yes.
in the
Yeah.
series.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Those are two of some of the best, I think, looks at how Don interacts with, I think, the two most important women in his
Yeah,
life.
agree.
No offense to Megan or Betty, they're not the most important women
No,
in his life.
no,
It's not even Sally, to be honest. It's June and Becky.
yeah,
The scene that always replays in my head, it's from the suitcase, is always the initial argument,
yeah,
right? With Peggy wanting to go off and meet her boyfriend, and Don's holding her up in the office and stuff like that, and then they get into this whole argument about glow code and about how she never gets the credit. He's never said thank you. And then he says, like, probably the most iconic line of the show, besides "Not great, Bob," is,
yeah,
"That's what the money is
yeah.
for." And it's a fantastic line. But at the same time, also, like, Dawn keeps having this gravitational pull on Peggy, in that Peggy really could have left anytime she
Oh
wanted, but
yeah,
she didn't.
yeah.
Because I think deep down she actually really wanted to be with him, because Peggy's boyfriend at the time, Mark, I think his name was,
Oh yes,
really, really doesn't know her the way that Dawn knows her. And I think that's why Peggy always gravitates to Dawn,
yeah,
all the conversations that they have, even the comedic relief when they found Roger's tape, right,
yeah,
of the memoir that he's making. It was a fantastic two-hander, and some of the best episodes were two-handers though.
yeah.
Although one of my favorite episodes also wasn't a two-hander, it is the ending climax final episode of season 3. Is called "Shut the Door, Have a
Oh
Seat,"
yeah, hmm,
which is Mad Men's attempt to do a heist episode
yeah,
that turned out to be really, really well. It's an episode where John and Roger and a few other key members of Sterling Cooper Draper Price left their old agency and attempted to steal their clients and bring it over to a new burgeoning agency that they're making.
yeah,
It plays out as probably the best heist episode I've seen on TV, although it really isn't a heist episode,
yeah.
but it feels like it.
Hmm.
And it plays out on these various scenes of people shutting the door and having a seat. One-on-one conversations, some variation of that happens in every scene,
Yeah,
whether it's with Don and his wife and kids, or whether it's with Don and Peggy, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And that line that we so loved also, that Don says to Peggy, at this time Peggy is like very upset with Don, and just not getting credit, feeling undervalued, feeling underappreciated. She leaves and she doesn't want to join this new rogue agency that they're making,
Hmm.
and she says that you only value me for my work, etc., etc. And she says that, if I say no to your offer right now, you walk out that door and I'll never see you again.
Yeah.
And Don, uh, in his best pitch ever, I think,
Absolutely.
says to Peggy, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to hire you,
Yeah.
which is the thing that she most wanted to hear. And his whole preamble about the Kennedy assassination, as we were talking about, right? How it's changed American consciousness, and no one understands that, but Peggy does,
Yeah.
and we need Peggy. That was great. Shut the Door, Have a Seat is one of the most, I think, bar none, exciting episodes of Mad Men. Don't you think?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. I was so invested in who they would call,
Mm,
and all of that. I think like at that point in time, I think Pete Campbell was a surprise to me. Or
yep.
rather, it was kind of like the trump card situation where I wasn't sure if he was going to, because it could really either go either way. He
Hmm.
was not a surprise.
Yep.
Bringing in Joan is a stroke of genius, right? And I think like it's the
Hmm.
first time in the series where the men outright acknowledge her prowess as kind of, yeah, as a professional. Uh,
Yeah.
really, really love that. Yeah, Ken and all that. Bringing Harry into the
Mm.
picture felt strange, but I mean, like it kind of explains itself overall, and that like is indicative of like the move away from like solely print ad into TV, all of
Mm.
that. But yeah, super interesting. Yeah, still one of the boldest kind of ideas ever, right? Like selling
Yep.
price, just fire us. Uh, that I had to pause at that moment, just to like, what? Wait, what?
Hmm.
And all of that, how that kind of unfolds, and like really as a mid franchise kind of like turning point was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Yep. Any other episodes that stick out to you? I think now's a good time to talk about the finale, lah, which is also obviously one of the most important episodes of every show.
Yeah,
The finale I thought was fantastic, and I've already described why I thought it was fantastic. His ending conversations with Joan, with
yeah,
Peggy, with Betty, with everyone, and the idea that Don is finally about to change yet again
yeah.
on the precipice of breakthrough, and he turns it into the most famous ad in the world, the Coke ad. What do you think about the finale of the series finale of the show?
Oh man, the conversation that he has with Peggy, I
Yep.
think here is the that is the fullness of their relationship across the decade that we follow them with here,
Mhm.
right? It's not long, it's not winding, it's not in depth in the amount of details that they offer, right? But I think especially, oh man, the acting here is just like phenomenal. The
Yep.
kind of like facial expressions, the kind of like intonations of their voices as they are having this what seems to be a fairly mundane conversation, more or less. Like there's nothing
Mhm.
particularly deep to it. Really sums up who they are as characters and their relationship over the course of everything they're doing. Even the trajectory of their lives and careers um,
Mhm.
is summed up in this conversation. The
Yeah.
conversation with Joan was heartbreaking to
Mhm.
me, because that there was a sadness there that I think are both Joan and Dawn feel like they could have done more for each other, right?
Yep.
And in particular, like Dawn never comes to support Joan until the Jaguar thing, right? Like,
Mhm.
and even then it's too little, too late. And it's kind of like, you know, like he tries to do hand waving, and obviously he doesn't work. Joan has to make her own decision anyway.
Yep.
Um, but like this, like there is this feeling that they could have, if they had supported each other a bit more early on,
Mm.
right?
Yes.
And again, going back to that where they were just like talking to each other at the bar, right? Right after Joan gets served her papers,
Mhm.
um, they have this small conversation about like in the initial period, like never cross Joan. I was so scared of you. like Joan and
Mm.
Peggy as the two like most important women in his life. That never that power dynamic at the beginning, right, essentially ruins what could possibly have been an incredible partnership from the beginning, right? Because a
Mhm.
lot of the things that Don lacks, Joan can fill up. It's not even the other partners, right? We're not even talking about the rest of the men. Whether we're talking about
Mm.
Cooper, we're talking about Sterling, and that the one who's holding everything up to allow, enable Don to be the best he can professionally is Joan, right? And because they
Yes. Yeah.
never kind of fulfill that, so that conversation is so laden with not regret necessarily, but the possibility of what could have been. And again, in a
Mhm.
very short conversation that doesn't actually touch on any of that, but like only refers to it. Wow. I
Mhm.
mean, like, it is the conversations that he has in the finale that are the most important to me. In
Mm.
terms of like framing my overall experience as someone who has followed like several hundred hours of this story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of the other like minor but also like great episodes that I want to shout out also is season 5, episode 5. It's called Signal 30. It's the one where Lane finally blows his cool and punches out Pete
Yeah.
Campbell, which is a fantasy that every Mad Men fan
Yeah.
has. This episode, like, exposes the private agonies of this man, and Lane chases his cherished ideals of being a real American and takes it really badly when his dreams get crushed.
Yeah.
Um, Ken is writing science fiction here.
Yeah.
Um, Pete is pining for this Scarlett Johansson looking girl in a driving class.
Yeah.
Roger chums another redhead who will never be Joan.
Yeah.
Uh, Don sits at a whorehouse drinking his bad memories away. It's such a great episode. What others that I loved? The hobo quote from season 1, obviously, is a very pivotal moment in Mad Men.
Yeah.
It's our first flashback to Dick Whitman, and
Yes.
obviously very important to the mythology of the show. There is an oft forgotten episode in season 4. It's season 4, episode 3, called The Good News. It's where a few deeply damaged people spend the final days of 1964 together.
Uh-huh.
Don is heading out to California to visit Anna, and then returns east for a weird New Year's adventure with Lane.
Yeah.
They heckle a Japanese monster movie before meeting a couple of lady friends in the
Yeah.
village. So many painfully intimate moments. Don painting in the living room with Anna. Joan throwing roses at Lane. Don slow dancing to Old Cape Cod with Anna's proto hippie niece,
Yes.
who is played by fucking Sarah Lance,
Oh
by the way, from
yeah. I fucking love
Legends of
that.
Tomorrow.
It was so hard to kind of divorce that, right? I'm like, oh my god, it's Sarah Lance. And
Yeah.
that and Pete gets involved with, oh no, what's her face? The one that goes to the hospital.
Yeah, I forgot the name also, but yes, I remember what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
like
Yeah.
I actually really enjoyed like those couple of episodes where she appears because
Hmm.
it's that that scene in the hospital where she can't remember him, right, is Pete's
Hmm.
realization of what he has become. And for
Mm.
him to completely be able to speak that to what he thinks is a stranger is those lines are fantastic. Yeah.
Also, yeah. Yeah, we're already kind of like running over time, but I would like to ask, what is, in your opinion, the best pitches of Mad Men?
Okay, we've had a discussion about this.
Yep.
I'm gonna say Don's is Carousel.
Of
For
course, the
sure.
Codex
The
Carousel.
Codex Carousel.
Go watch it on YouTube if you haven't seen it.
Yeah.
His Kodak Carousel pitch is tear jerking in the least. I don't blame Harry for running out of the room crying.
Yeah.
It was incredible. You're always dealing with clients who want to emphasize features, right?
Yes.
But he's not selling features. He's selling an idea. Or he's selling an emotion.
Yeah.
It's not a spaceship. It's a time machine.
Yes.
That's exactly what a carousel is. It's perfect. It's one of the best pictures I've ever seen. What else? Yeah.
So that's that. I think for Peggy, interestingly enough for Peggy, and I'm not sure if this counts as a pitch exactly, her
Yep.
pivot for the hard days work ad over the
Mm-hmm.
phone is fucking genius.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to be able to assess the need to change the demographic because of the client's needs and to come up with it on the spot with the whole Lady
Yep.
Godiva thing is
Mm.
absolutely like, I that's like generational talent, honestly, to be able to do that kind of like on the spot. I fucking love
Mm.
that. I think that Ginsburg had a lot of really solid pitches that
Yeah,
everybody
Ginstop
just kind of
was.
tramples on because he's not a main character.
Yeah, he was really underrated. He was like a really solid admin that was just in a company full of great admen
Yeah, yeah.
and women. Yeah. I think Dawn's Beljolie ad for the lipstick,
Oh,
pitch for the lipstick was great.
yes.
The definition of big dick energy, that was what Dawn did there.
Yeah.
He clients weren't buying his pitch; they had their own vision for it. But we've all worked with clients,
Yeah.
right? And clients always hire you for their expertise, and then in the end, they're just gonna do whatever they want. So why bother hiring you, right? And Dawn is just fucking fed up with this. He does what I've always wanted to do. He just stands up,
Yeah.
and he says it in a more eloquent way than I could ever like phrase it. I mean, he says that why should I waste my time with non-believers? You're non-believers. Why should we be wasting time with kabuki?
Yeah.
Which is an insane line, and everybody looks at him like, what the fuck are you doing, bro?
Yeah.
And because at that point in time, so I also didn't understand what Don was doing,
Yeah.
and what a line. Why should we waste time with kabuki? And it just confused everyone, and it allowed him to just delve deeper in what he was saying.
Yeah.
That was great. Peggy's Burger Chef
Oh
pitch
God.
was I think her carousel,
Yes.
where she manages to make this really emotional, impassioned argument for a fast food joint
Yeah.
as a place where families can come together because they're competing with the TV. What a way to frame it,
Yeah.
you know? Yeah, the way that she sold it, the way that she said, like this is your real competition in your living room. Like, whose living room doesn't have a television? And when you're all eating dinner, aren't you all watching TV?
Yeah.
If you want to connect, where do you go? Come to Burger Chef. This is where families are.
Yeah.
Wild, and but it
Addicting.
was a great pitch too.
Uh,
Um,
Megan.
there was a pitch that it was.
Oh,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Megan's pitch for Heinz beans.
Yeah, 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 yeah. There was what I was about to say.
Oh yeah,
Heinz. Yeah.
yeah. Heinz. Megan's pitch for Heinz beans was. I mean, not she didn't get to pitch it, but like the idea in and of itself, brilliant. Like
Mm-hmm.
again, like for all intents and purposes, like Megan is like a Shakespeare heroine in the most tragic of senses.
Yeah.
And obviously a nod to her wanting to act and all of that. But she does have talent. Like very, very honestly, that she is shown to have like the spark of something that could really make her stand
Mm.
out in the industry that Peggy recognizes as well. Her
Yep.
only mistake was marrying Don.
Yep. Absolutely. A lot of women's mistakes were either being associated with Dawn or marrying Dawn.
Yeah,
Absolutely true. Yeah, those are. In fact, I actually think like Dawn's eventual campaign, the minimalist one,
yeah,
where they was actually a really great idea that was rejected by some very short-sighted Heinz execs.
yeah.
But sometimes clients are that way, like they just don't
Oh
see.
yeah,
They want what they paid for, so they want more.
yeah.
But sometimes less is more,
Absolutely.
and that was Don's, I think, one of his most innovative
Yeah,
pitches of a whole minimalist ad. And of course, the first episode, the Lucky Strike pitch, was the thing that sold us on the show.
yes.
That was really great. It's toasted. Yeah,
Uh,
so many great moments in Mad Men.
I don't know if that's a
Sorry.
pitch necessarily, but like when Don and Roger go into Dow Chemical and he gives
Yeah.
the speech on happiness. I don't think that's a pitch necessarily, but
Hmm.
man, like just going in there, standing up, saying what he says, and walking out, right? The whole
Yep.
idea, like, what is happiness, but the moment before you need more happiness, right? Is like
Mm.
amazing, right? The delivery of that, the tone in which that he's delivered is completely understanding his place and the appeal to emotion and logic that he needs to succeed at, and understanding the demographic of the people, the audience in front of him. Oh,
Hmm.
wow, masterful, absolutely masterful.
Yeah, and he delivers the motto of the show also.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's move on to our outro here, where we'll talk about some of the recommendations, some of the best stuff that you've seen this month.
Okay.
What have you seen this month that you maybe would like to shout out?
Oh man. Okay. I'm gonna shout out. I'll be talking about this later in the month as well for Anime Corner.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
but like just like whoever's still listening at this point in time, I recently binged this anime that came out in entirety on Netflix called Kotaro Lives Alone.
Mm,
Oh my god, I am so fucking blown away by that. It had one of those things where like the animation style or the art style didn't really get me, reminding me a bit of like Ranking of Kings, that I didn't really like the animation style at first.
right.
And it's like this absurd premise where a 4-year-old boy kind of like moves into one of those like two-story, seven tatami mat apartment buildings by himself, right? And he
Okay.
kind of like ends up with a found family of the random and strange people who live in that apartment building.
Mm,
And then it is hilariously funny because of the premise, but at the same time, it is one of the most quietly heartbreaking anime that I've ever watched. And the
Mm-hmm.
balance between like the kind of dark humor slash slapstick combined with the thematic exploration of like childhood trauma, abuse, and abandonment is
Mm.
mind-blowingly good. So
Sweet.
good. I finished everything in a single sitting, despite the fact that I
Nice.
had work to do, just because like I needed to see where it went. Right, I needed to see what
Mm.
kind of exploration was actually possible. And then later on, I found out that there was actually a live action that came out earlier that was based on the
Right.
manga that I hadn't watched. So I haven't watched
Okay.
the thing, but like there's something about the strangeness of the anime and some of the things they can get away with that was like,
Yep.
whew, so good, so good. That's one of
That's
the standout
awesome.
for me this month.
Nice. Nice. Anything else?
Oh no, I think a lot of my time has been spent like kind of catching up with Mad Men, especially the
Nice.
last two
Awesome.
seasons.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sweet. Okay. Yeah. This actually wasn't on my recommendations also, but I recently caught an anime called Kids on the Slope, which is about
Oh. Mm.
a classical pianist in secondary school, I believe, who gets into the jazz scene
Yeah.
in a new town that he moves to. It's great. I've never seen it before, never even heard of it, but um I was listening to jazz on YouTube, and one of those like autoplay mixes things.
Yeah.
Then I heard like a jazz tune from the show I had never heard. It's from the OST of Kids on the Slope. I downloaded Kids on the Slope. That's how I watched it.
Yeah.
So thanks YouTube for your random algorithm while I was listening to Miles Davis. I got onto Kids on the Slope thanks to you. Okay, so I'm gonna separate my recs according to TV and film.
Okay. Cool.
Film number one, most important rec is The Worst Person in the World, which is now showing at the projector.
Yeah.
Best film of 2022 in my opinion. About millennial anxieties, about a woman who just doesn't know what to do, indecision.
Yeah.
Um, on the same idea as that as well. It's also like if you want to watch another movie about the Norwegian woman who is saddled with the challenges of adulthood, the pressures of unwanted motherhood.
Uh huh.
It's another movie called Ninja Baby, which is almost very similar to The Worst Person in the World, and yet of equal quality and presented in a
Oh,
very different way.
interesting.
Ninja Baby is about a woman very similar to the main character of The Worst Person in the World, except that she's a comic book illustrator. One fine day, she realizes that she's 6 months pregnant. Too late for an abortion. Just realized it one day. She's one of those like just never realized she was pregnant. So she draws a character called Ninja Baby, a representative of the fetus that's now out with her,
Hmm.
and has frequent conversations with this animated character, who is just telling her all the time that she's making terrible life choices.
Yeah.
So yeah, number one is The Worst Person in the World. Must catch. Ninja Baby is you could catch it, but The Worst Person in the World is a better version of that film.
Interesting. Okay.
Uh, Red Rocket is coming out next month. It's a
Yeah.
new film by Sean Baker, who we've talked about his previous film, The Florida Project, before.
Hmm.
Red Rocket is new, is by him. It's similar in his style. It's about a washed up dirtbag asshole porn star who is so broke that he has to move back to his Texas hometown and hustle for money.
Yeah.
It's actually really fun to watch, but also this guy is such a sleazebag that it makes you feel icky.
Hmm.
Um, Flea, also showing at the projector, is also really good. It is an animated memoir, Persepolis style,
Yeah.
telling the story of an Afghan child refugee and his escape from Kabul when the Taliban took over back in the 2000s. Writing with Fire is another great documentary, also at the projector.
Yeah.
Highly recommended too. It's about India's only women-run newspaper, and not only are they women facing discrimination and persecution in a very patriarchal society,
Hmm.
all these women happen to come from the Dalit class. If you're not aware of the caste system in India, Dalits are one of the bottom, if not the very bottom of the caste system. So they have that dual edge of persecution there. Finally, my recommendations for film is The Souvenir Part 2, which is a sequel to a film called The Souvenir. The Souvenir is written and directed by a filmmaker called Joanna Hack,
Hmm.
who wrote a movie in 2019 about her experiences in film school, particularly about a painful period where she fell in love with a heroin junkie and was always almost ruined by that. So that's the Souvenir Part 1. The Souvenir Part 2 follows the aftermath of that relationship. And what does the main character do? She decides to make a movie called The Souvenir. So the Souvenir Part 2 is the making of Souvenir Part 1. Interesting take on it, and I really loved it. Final recommendation for film side is a documentary called Lucy and Desi.
Hmm.
If you've seen Being the Ricardos, Aaron Sorkin's abysmal new film about I Love Lucy stars Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. Uh, Watch this instead. This is Amy Poehler's documentary about Lucy and Desi's real life, their professional relationship, the art they meet together, the family that came together and fell apart. A great love letter to the two important pioneers in Hollywood entertainment, particularly in the 40s and 50s when Desi Arnaz, a Cuban immigrant, and Lucille Ball, a woman, became the two biggest stars in
Yeah.
Hollywood. Great breakdown about their professional and personal legacies. On the TV side of things, My Brilliant Friend is back.
Hmm.
And we've talked about My Brilliant Friend a lot. I feel it's one of the best TV shows on air right now. It continues to be one of the greatest shows on air in season three. It takes place in the 1970s now. So the girls are in their late 20s slash early 30s in the show. They have families, they have become mothers. It's a very different show now because they're adults. And I do have to say that the two girls who play Leila and Lenu, who are 18 and 19 respectively, do a hell of a job convincing me that they were in their 30s because I actually legitimately believe that they were in their 30s. Yeah. I had to look up that they were still 18 and 19, and they are still 18 and 19 here. So good job on makeup, good job on the performances. Better Things is back for its final season now. Fantastic show as always. Pamela Adlon's dramedy about mothers and daughters continues to be one of the most low key hangout delights that you can find. It's available on Disney Plus in Singapore. State of the Union is actually really, really great. Also, season two is out now on Sundance TV. It is a drama slash comedy series. I guess it's a dramedy. The main hook of State of the Union is that each episode is only 8 minutes long. It's 10 minutes. It's 10 episodes with 8 minutes, so it's less than a movie. Go check it out. Every season follows a different couple as they go through therapy and work out why their marriage is in dissolution. Finally, on the TV side is Pachinko, which is probably gonna end up being, I think, my number one show of the year. But it's hard to say at the moment. But Pachinko is based on Min Jin Lee's amazing historical novel, which follows four generations of a Korean family, beginning in the early 1900s, pre World War II, under Japanese occupation, all the way to the 1980s, following her great great grandchild, Solomon, as he becomes the owner of a pachinko parlor in Japan. So yeah, those are all the recommendations for this month.
Nice.
We will be back in a couple of
Yep.
weeks for the next genre, but in the meantime, go check out Worst Person in the World, My Brilliant Friend, Better Things, Pachinko especially is very very important. Read the book and watch the show also when it comes on Apple TV Plus. Um, My Brilliant Friend Pachinko is actually weirdly similar because they are adaptations of very beloved novels
Hmm.
or series of novels, but end up being just as good, which is very rare.
Yeah.
We'll be back with genre where we'll talk about a lot of good things. That's actually like I'm over the past few months I haven't been very excited by genre equality because there aren't a lot of good things to talk about, but
Yeah.
I'm quite excited this month. And none of them are the Batman, weirdly enough. So
We would definitely dive into that as our
we'll
major
talk.
topic. Yeah.
We'll talk about Batman for sure, but like, that's the least of like my excitement for like there are other better things than a Batman, and I think I saw some of my Twitter mentions. Some people are quite upset that I don't like Book of Boba Fett or Demon Slayer or things like that.
Yeah.
Boy, wait till I tell you that Turning Red is better than the Batman.
Oh yeah.
Let's let's see where we get there. Yeah. Well, what are you most excited to talk about for the next
Oh
genre?
man. Okay. I'm interested to talk about the Batman just like in terms of its place within the
Oh,
Batman lore, but not
definitely. Yes, yes,
as
yes.
a film in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
Like we will pick it apart, right? And I'm sure I'm very keen to hear what Hadi has to say as well.
Mm.
That for sure. I'm excited to talk about the Jujutsu Kaisen movie, which I managed to catch. Uh,
Yeah, out now on at GV, by the way.
yeah, I think it's interesting. It's interesting. I think it opens up a lot of possibilities, and we'll dive into whether or not it's worth catching in cinemas itself.
Yeah, I really, really liked Upload Season 2. I liked it a lot. Turning Red is my favorite film of the month so far.
Yep.
Sorry, Doctor Strange, but I think Michelle Yeoh has you beat in the multiverse movie because everything everywhere all at
Oh,
once is the most bonkers thing I've ever said. I will say in my review though, like later on, I'll go in depth about this. I
Yeah.
admire the ingenuity of nearly every scene and every frame of it.
Wow.
Sometimes it gets a bit too much.
Yeah.
It's novelty to the point of exhaustion. And I'll delve into like the ups and downs of that as well. DMZ is another thing that I want you guys to watch and then listen to our review of. DMZ is based on that comic book that Brian Woods created back in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
It's about America after a second civil war, and now Manhattan is a demilitarized zone. What seemed absolutely fantastical in the early 2000s now seems almost inevitable in 2022, and it's quite a scary watch.
Yeah.
So check that out, and we'll talk about much more, including The Boys as an animated spin-off called Diabolical,
Hmm.
which is fairly decent in a Star Wars Visions kind of way.
Interesting. Okay.
And a lot of other things. ISA's Anime Corner, we'll be talking about My Dress Up Darling and the anime that you just talked
Yeah.
about. Yeah, lots of stuff. Human Resources is a Big Mouth spin-off that I'm quite excited to talk about too.
Uh-huh.
Till next time, guys. This has been Hit Zero.
Amaisa.
Goodbye.
Yo.